being here. We're most grateful to you. For the sake of the record, Dawn, might you begin, identify yourself for the sake of the record, who you are, and then Andrew and then Chris will begin our questioning.
Okay. Dawn Abell, and I work in the Social Security...
You need to speak up, or move that bottle away from your mic, I think.
Right.
Yeah, great.
Dawn Abell,
brilliant.
Scottish Government.
Thank you.
I'm Jeane Freeman. I'm Minister for Social Security in the Scottish Government.
Great.
Hello, I'm Stephen Kerr. I'm the Director for Social Security in the Scottish Government.
Brilliant. Andrew?
Good morning. Welcome to the committee. I would like to kick off by asking the Minister, to what extent do you think the Scottish flexibility, specifically the option for claimants to receive twice monthly payments, in your view, will improve universal credit in Scotland?
Well, I think that what our Scottish choices do is improve the situation for the individual, in that we offer them a choice over how they want their rent to be paid, how they want to deal with that, and whether or not they want to be paid, as you've said, twice monthly. What those choices, of course, don't do, because we have very limited powers and universal credit remains a UK government benefit, what those choices don't do is fix what we believe to be the fundamental problems with universal credit in both policy and delivery terms. Those problems being, in particular in policy, the freeze on the benefits within universal credit, a 4-year freeze, that by 2020 will have taken £3.8 billion out of welfare spend in Scotland. The wait time, albeit reduced to 5 weeks, still in our view is too long and introduces additional hardship for individuals. And of course the delivery problems, which see a significant number of people. I think DWP's own figures are 24% of new claims to universal credit are not met within the 6 weeks wait time as it currently stands. So our choices make limited improvements, but they, because we don't have the necessary powers over that benefit, do not fix universal credit.
I mean, there is an argument that the advances which are available actually mean that there is no mandatory 5-week wait, and that they are easier to get now than they were before. But specifically on the 2-week wait, there is an argument that people in Scotland who choose to go for the 2 monthly payments will actually be worse off than their equivalents in England. By week 6, a claimant in Scotland will by week 9, they will only have 6 weeks worth of their payment, whilst in England, a claimant will actually have their full 8-week payment. So they will actually be worse off in Scotland than they would be in England.
Okay, let me deal with both of those.
Yes.
Your point on the advances, I understand. However, that is a loan that is repaid. So whilst people may receive some money in advance of the wait, it is nonetheless a loan which is then repaid over up to a 12-month period at a level decided by the DWP, and therefore they receive less money because they are repaying that loan. In contrast, I have to say, with our own welfare fund, which is not a loan. In terms of the point about claimants in Scotland who exercise the choice for fortnightly payments are worse off, I have not only heard that argument, I've read it, and I have written indeed to your chair to make it categorically clear that that is untrue. Claimants in Scotland do not receive less money. They simply have a choice.
But they take longer to get their full money.
Please let me finish. They simply have a choice whether or not they want to receive the benefit they're due under universal credit in fortnightly payments or in a monthly payment. They are being treated by us as sentient adults who are perfectly capable of making that choice. And I hope we certainly sent to the committee our information leaflet for the individual, which explains in, I hope, very clear detail. We did test it over a number of weeks with individuals in receipt of the benefit themselves to ensure that it was as clear as possible. That is, of course, our whole approach to social security in Scotland, is to involve directly those on the receiving end of it to help us design our system. So we did test it, to be very clear. I'm sure members will have followed it and understood that the choice is there for the individual. We also quite clearly offer them, when they come to exercise that choice through their online journal are able to decide first whether or not they want the rent paid direct to their landlord, and then whether or not they want to choose fortnightly payments. That allows them to exercise actually the choices that I suspect you and I make about how we manage our finances.
One of the benefits of universal credit, though, is that through moving to a monthly paycheck, it gets people used to experiencing what it is like to be in the world of work, where more and more people are being paid monthly. If they choose to be paid 2 weekly, does this not make it more difficult and actually make it more difficult for them to get such things as direct debits or access to cheaper utility bills that are paid monthly?
Well, in fact, the Resolution Foundation's research found that the majority, 58%, of new claimants moving into universal credit were either paid fortnightly or weekly. So the assertion that the majority of individuals are paid monthly, I think, deserves some examination. But again, it is about giving people a choice over how they manage their finances. We have no evidence, I know of no evidence, that suggests that that choice makes it more difficult to do the kind of things you're suggesting, for example, direct debits or any other matter.
Chris?
Thanks. Jeane, obviously there is a view from some that paying universal credit direct to landlords risks preventing claimants from learning to manage their own finances. Obviously the Scottish Government's taken a different approach. Could you just explain that approach and why the Scottish Government take a different view from the Department of Work and Pensions in terms of payment of rents?
Well, all the evidence that we have worked from the housing associations, from our own local government body, COSLA, which of course, through their local authority membership, are responsible for a significant number of social housing, and from private landlords, is that what happens is that individuals accrue significant rent arrears during that wait period, and so they begin, if you like, their time on universal credit at some disadvantage. And all of those individuals, together with the work we did, and I know that you will know this, Mr Stevens, but perhaps other members do not, that in 2016 we conducted a significant direct consultation with individuals, including those on receipt of benefits in Scotland. We now work with 2,400 volunteers themselves in receipt of the 11 benefits we will be responsible for in designing our system. So all of our engagement with those individuals, with the various associations I've mentioned, with key third sector organisations, and of course with Citizens Advice Bureaus and Citizens Advice Scotland, all advised us and told us very clearly that offering people the choice of having their rent paid direct to their landlord was something that would significantly ease their management of their finances. Of course, in the whole area of these choices, whilst people can choose to exercise them, having begun to exercise them, they can also choose to stop exercising them. So that choice isn't a one-off. It helps individuals know that their homes are safe whilst they continue to either look for work or look for better employment and still manage the finances that they have in terms of looking after their families and paying their other bills.
So just to be clear then, the evidence came from claimants themselves that they would want this option and it would help them with their finances?
Absolutely, absolutely it did. And also came, as I said, from both private and public sector landlords, which is why our initial intention was to offer the choice in terms of social landlords, but we extended that to private sector landlords because it was a point that they raised very strongly with us.
Thank you.
Jeane, do you keep your eye on those that opt to exercise their freedom to pay the rent direct? Given our experience of people, once they're in debt, they find it very, very difficult to get out of debt.
Well, certainly the organisations we work with keep their eye on those individuals. The choices were only introduced from mid-November last year, so we have a limited period of time so far. They were introduced initially to those individuals coming on to universal credit full service as it was introduced. By the end of this month, the end of January, They'll be extended to people who were on Universal Credit Full Service prior to mid-November. And then, obviously, as it rolls out across Scotland, then the choices will be available to them. So the data is collected by DWP, and we will continue to monitor and evaluate that data. The data for the first 6-week period, from mid-November to the end of December, shows us that 5,800 people were offered those choices. Of that number, just over 2,500 exercised a choice to either take fortnightly payments or to have their rent paid direct to the landlord, or to do both. So just over 2,500 have exercised the choice in one or other capacity.
Can I ask one other further question before we go on to Ruth, Jeane? If I'm signing on for Universal Credit in Scotland, and I would like my rent paid directly, but there's a process of judging what I'm eligible for, are you able to develop any early warning system to tell the landlords that the person I am on Universal Credit and there will be a rent payment in all probability, but we can't actually define exactly what that payment will be?
Well, of course, the choices kick in assessment period 2. So the individual has gone through the first assessment period, and I would hope at that point the various components of their universal credit entitlement have been settled. They are advised at the assessment period 2 that if they are choosing to have their rent paid direct to their landlord, they need to continue to pay it themselves until they receive the message from DWP that payment has been set up. So there is a degree of protection around all of that, and we deliberately wanted the choice introduced at assessment period 2 so that some of that work that you're touching on could be completed.
On the case of the individual claimant, I mean, given that we know that from our housing association, certainly in Wirral, there's a significant increase in the numbers of tenants who are actually falling behind, who then build up rent arrears. Some of those tenants who've never been in debt before, these are respectable working class people who loathe the idea that even if they think the money's coming down the tracks, they've never been in that position before. How do you think your system helps counter that feeling amongst individuals that I've always been in control of my affairs, and but with direct rent payments, and I've never ever been behind with my rent before? That crippling effect on individuals.
Yes, indeed, and of course, as a constituency MSP, I understand that, having comparable cases of my own and my colleagues in the Scottish Parliament. I think I wouldn't overclaim the significance of our choices. I think they are important. They're a direct response to what individuals and organisations like Citizens Advice Bureau and others have asked us to do, but as I said at the outset, they do not fix every element of universal credit. But I do think it is important, and in fact all our engagement with those individuals tells us that returning some degree of decision making into their own hands helps to some extent with the kind of psychological impacts that you're touching on. And our approach as a government is simply to see those who look for the financial support they're entitled to in a social security system as our equals and as adults, and therefore the kind of choices and decision making over my own life that I expect to have, then I want them to have that too.
Great, Jeane. Thank you. Ruth?
Okay. Hello, Jeane. Thank you very much for sharing with us the details of the numbers of people so far who've opted for the different choices. Can I ask if the Scottish Government is doing any evaluation of the different outcomes on universal credit of the different cohorts, depending on which choices or lack of choices they've opted for, please, in terms of rent arrears and personal indebtedness and moving into work?
Sure. So I don't expect the choices to make any difference to whether or not universal credit assists people to move into work. Choices, as I've said, are very limited in those terms. And we are only at the very beginning of introducing this option for citizens living in Scotland. So we're working with the first set of data. All of the data comes, of course, from the DWP because they hold that data as their benefit. But our analysts and good folks like Stephen and Don here with me are continuing to work with the DWP to see, as the data sets increase, as we do more and more of this, how we might be able to evaluate more of the information that we receive and what additional information we might want to receive from DWP that perhaps breaks down those numbers a bit more than we have at this point. But of course, all of that has to feed into the significant task that the DWP itself has, not only in universal credit, but on a range of other areas that it's responsible for. So we have to have those discussions and those negotiations. I should point out, of course, that in order for DWP to deliver these choices for us, we as the Scottish Government do make a payment to them for that service, and we are their customer.
Can I bring Dawn and Stephen in, Jeane? And as they're at the coalface negotiating with the DWP over the management of data, can you tell us what is it like, please?
In terms of working with DWP and the choices?
Trying to get the information that you require.
The information that DWP has provided is, I think, information that, as the Minister says, will help us understand how the choices are being exercised and the impact that they're having on people. As government officials, we're always keen to work in a data-rich environment, and Neil Cooling and I, who will be appearing before you in the next session, have had quite a long number of conversations about making sure that the information between the Scottish Government and the UK Government flows quite well to give us, as I say, rich a picture as we possibly can. The conversations are constructive. DWP's keen within the boundaries within which they work to share as much information as they can with us, and obviously we're keen to receive that information and learn how the services that we're providing can continually be improved. I wonder if Dawn's got anything to add to that?
Just to add to that, we have worked with DWP to agree a working level agreement for the delivery of the Scottish Universal Choices. So that essentially sets out how we're going to work together, and it has key information in it that will be given to us, such as management information, but also the government's governance arrangements and the cost model as well, of which the delivery of the universal credit choices are based.
Right, thank you. Back to Ruth. Sorry, Ruth.
Thank you. Can I ask whether that data that comes back to you from DWP enables you, is it simply numbers of claimants who opt for the different choices, or does it include evidence that will enable you to follow that cohort's experience through universal credit?
At the moment, I think it's just raw data in terms of numbers, isn't it?
6 weeks.
Yeah.
6 weeks. So at this point, and as Dawn said, at this point it is numbers.
Yeah.
And as Dawn said, part of the agreement with DWP is to continue to discuss what additional management information they can provide for us that would allow us, for example, to do what you're suggesting. But we introduced these choices from mid-November last year. We're now towards the end of January, so we are in the early stages of this. And I think the additional point that is worth making is, of course, the DWP, as indeed my own officials, work to the strategic vision and direction of their elected ministers. And there is no point in pretending that the two governments, the UK government and the Scottish government, do not come at these matters from completely different political standpoints. And so our officials, our respective set of officials, have to try and not only negotiate and work to get the information that their respective ministers require, but to work within that overall environment where we do not necessarily, as politicians, agree with the approach that each other is taking on social security.
Can you tell us, Jeane, a little bit more where you disagree with the British government's approach?
Well, my own view is that social security is a right that is built into the legislation that I'm currently taking through the Scottish Parliament, is the whole centrality of human rights in this matter. We see social security as an investment that is collectively made by citizens in themselves and in each other, that it is an entitlement that we all have and part of, if you like, a contract between government and its citizens, whereby we all contribute.
How does that show up differently in your relationship with talking about universal credit with the British government?
Well, I don't believe that the Scottish Government would freeze the component parts of universal credit for the years that the UK Government has done it. In terms of the delivery, all of the information we have from Audit Scotland and other bodies charged with helping governments deliver major programmes, and we're engaged now in one, tell us that the way that you do it is in manageable chunks. You learn the lessons from each one in terms of delivery, you apply those lessons, and you then move on. Consequently, our call to the UK Government to pause the rollout of universal credit to fix some of the delivery issues that we see and evidence from our local authorities and Citizens Advice Bureau, substantive evidence points us towards, in order to fix the delivery issues and then continue the process. I am minded, as I know you will be, that the proposition for universal credit, when it was first made some time ago, was a proposition that attracted widespread political support, and that support has now dissipated in the reality of refusing to pause it, fix it, and then move on, and some of the political decisions that have been made in terms of the content of universal credit and the freezing of those benefits.
When the previous Secretary of State was before us, Jeane, he said that he knew that he could, there's a firewall in January during which he could say a halt to continued rollout until he was totally satisfied that individual claimants wouldn't be actually on the rough end of that rollout. Have you managed to gain the right in Scotland to have a firewall in which you say the evidence that we have suggests the rollout should be halted for the moment?
No, we haven't. And the UK Government's view is that this is a UK benefit for which they are responsible, and the devolution of powers do not give us that right. So we are in the position as a government of attempting to lobby and influence like anyone else.
Would you like that choice?
I would.
Ruth, let's finish off the night.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Sorry to return to what we're talking about different data sets. And obviously, as a committee, then we're as concerned as you are about the impact on individual claimants of the experience of universal credit, and are very keen that data is collected both at a UK level and, where possible, at more local levels. So, I wondered whether you would be able to assist us in pressing forward some data that will enable you to produce more analysis of different experiences under the different choices that are made, and whether you might be prepared to share that with this committee. Were you able to obtain it in order to inform our recommendations for the UK Government as a whole, including Scotland?
Yes, we certainly would. I mean, I am very happy that we keep this committee up to date with the discussions that both Stephen and Don have described with DWP colleagues to increase the level and the detail of management information that might be possible for Scotland. Of course, so I'm very happy to share that with you as we reach those agreements. In addition, of course, I have to say that we have an advantage in Scotland as a relatively small country, in that we can work very directly with our local authorities and with our local Citizens Advice Scotland to follow through on how individuals who exercise the choices whether or not they are appearing in greater or lesser numbers for additional support such as our welfare fund and other matters than others who perhaps aren't exercising those choices. But that is a longer term piece of work, obviously, as the choices are rolled out as universal credit rolls out.
I would also just add that the Minister mentioned experience panels earlier on, and there's quite a rich body of evidence coming from those discussions, and we can make those available to the committee. It obviously goes beyond universal credit, but into the devolved benefits, and there is no reason in the future, for example, that if we wanted to convene a group of people later this year into next year who spent some time on the universal credit choices to understand what that experience was like for them, there's no reason why we couldn't do that. We have the mechanism in place, and that would provide us with deeper insight for the committee and others as well.
Thank you very much. Ruth? Okay. Quick one from Andrew, and then Alex and Heidi.
You mentioned that you had problems with delivery that you think could be solved by pausing and fixing universal credit. I just wondered what those specific problems were, and also as a quick follow-up, to say that I think all of us here who've come from different political ideologies and traditions in terms of where we approach universal credit have been quietly surprised and impressed by the attitude of DWP recently in terms of their approach, fixing the problems as they see it as we move along when those issues have been brought to them. So what do you think could be solved by pausing the process, which couldn't be solved by slowly fixing it as we go along, as the DWP has been doing so far?
Well, I think there is a problem for any organisation that's engaged in a major piece of work, such as the rollout and delivery of universal credit. We can look to the private sector, we can look to other government plans and see that simply the logistics of continuing to fix something as you roll along makes it more difficult for you to fix it. And if you're trying to fix it because it is causing problems directly for individuals in receipt of universal credit in this instance, then you continue to cause those problems whilst you continue to try and fix it. Now, I genuinely do not see the sense of that I also think arguably it is not for me, but I think arguably it is a little unfair on those charged with delivery to ask them to get up to speed on a new system, then get up to speed on how you might change that system, then do that again, whilst all the time you have in front of you fellow citizens who require your support and help. And you might not be bang up to date with what the most recent change was. So I think from just about every angle that you can look at this, I can't see the common sense in continuing when you know there are things to be fixed and not pausing it and fixing it, letting your people get up to date and speed with that so they then can offer the better service you want to offer to the recipients.
On that specific point, though, you talk about fixing the specific issues. What, if you could, as the Scottish Government, what specific issues would you fix if you had the powers to do that? What do you think needs to be fixed?
I think there is a significant issue in terms of staff training and understanding of it. I think there are issues around the impact on individuals with terminal illness, which is different from what the position of legacy benefits. I think that needs to be resolved. I think it is wrong that an elected politician like myself cannot act for one of my constituents in that instance. I think that is entirely wrong. Okay. And I think there may be, I am not completely familiar with this, but I know from our own work in terms of IT delivery systems that there may be some significant pressures in altering IT systems as you want to improve the delivery. So, I think that's enough to be going on with, to say, just pause it. It's not actually, you don't lose face by doing that. That is the right thing to do. Pause it, fix it, move on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Alex?
Thanks very much for coming down today. It's been really interesting so far. There are three quick things I'd like to touch on. One, going back to what Ruth was saying, just on a specific point. One of the things I think we'd be interested in is whether your flexibilities have any impact on issues such as medium-term rent arrears. And so I appreciate that you only went into this phase in November, but really as soon as you have anything on that, it would be fascinating for us. And if you could give us a sense of when that might be, that would be very helpful. And presumably you've got evaluations on this sort of thing running at the moment.
Well, I think as we've just described, the evaluation that we can conduct depends on the level of data that the DWP can give us. So that's the discussions we're continuing with DWP. The numbers who would be offered those Scottish choices is determined by the Rollout programme. What I'm very happy to... my answer to your question is, of course, we're very happy to share that with you. In terms of when we might be able to do that, if you would give me the leeway to say, can I come back to you on that, as soon as we have a sensible indication of when we might be able to do it.
Okay. One of the things we're going to be raising with the new minister in the second panel is the interaction between universal credit and self-employment. I was wondering whether you have any insights on that interaction from Scotland.
I don't believe we do.
No. Nothing above and beyond, I think, what you'll hear today from the second panel.
Okay, thanks. And lastly, Jeane, and you mentioned that the Scottish Government was opposed to the benefit freeze, and understand that. Has the Scottish Government offered to pay for the freeze to be unfrozen, to be melted in Scotland? Have you had that conversation with DWP?
No. I think for two reasons. We already spend 100 million from a significantly reducing budget in Scotland in mitigating what we consider to be the worst impacts of the UK Government's welfare policies, primarily what we call the bedroom tax. I believe they call it the spare bedroom subsidy or some such. And also to provide support through our Scottish Welfare Fund in situations of crisis and hardship. But of course we need to remember that we are part of the United Kingdom, and our citizens contribute to the finances of the United Kingdom, some of which comes back in the block grant, which is indeed the figure that I'm referring to as reducing significantly, I think 8.9% by 2020. So the idea that the Scottish Government would use the limited resources we have to, in effect, ask our people to pay twice for that privilege seems to me somewhat pushing it. And so we would not look to use additional resources over and above what I've already said, and the additional resources that we will contribute to the improvements we will make to the 11 benefits that we will be directly responsible for, most notably the significant increase in support for families and the birth of their first, and in our case in Scotland, subsequent children. We don't put a cap on the size of families. Those all take additional resources we've already committed to from our own budget.
Okay, but on the freeze, obviously it wouldn't be Scottish citizens paying twice, because that means that Scottish citizens on benefits would be receiving an additional payment that people in the rest of the United Kingdom weren't receiving. But and do you think you will have this conversation with DWP, or have you ruled it out?
I don't imagine that we will have a conversation with DWP. We won't have a conversation with DWP. I will not have a conversation with the Secretary of State that suggests that we pay from the Scottish budget to further than we are already doing to ameliorate the effects of the policies of her government. But I will have a conversation that suggests that those policies from her government might be reconsidered.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to something completely different, but before I do that, just I don't know whether it would be helpful, not wishing to speak on your behalf, Chair, but just...
you will now do so.
But it doesn't normally stop me, so... just you saying, Alex, your question, I think you also asked about this, evaluating the data to know, obviously it's early days, how quickly you can track the success of that. Could we as a committee write to DWP encouraging them to provide the data that the Scottish Government need? Would that be something we could do? Just if that would help at all, to give you that data. So the completely different thing. So one area that you are able to change and do things differently in Scotland, as I understand it, is the delivery of PIP assessments.
Yes.
And that you're going to be changing the delivery mechanism in terms of who does it, but all the process. And I think that's 2020, is it, when that comes in, when you'll have the opportunity?
By then.
By 2020. So just really, could you give us a sense of how far you're up to with that, how the model's going to look different, how you know it's going to be better, just to give us a flavour, really, of how things are going to be different in Scotland?
Sure. To make sense of that, I need to take us back to what happens at the point of first decision. So in our view, the key to this is to get the right information in front of those who make the decisions at that first point. And we have established not only, as Stephen and I have both mentioned, the experience panels with those 2,400 volunteers. We have an expert advisory group chaired by Dr McCormick from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, but bringing in also BMA's General Practitioner Chair and others to work with us on the disability and the carers' benefits that we will be responsible for. And so what we are aiming to do is secure access by this brand new public service in Scotland, the Social Security Agency, to information that is already held by primarily two other public services, our health service and local government, which is charged with social care, and we have, of course, moved significantly towards integrated health and social care in Scotland. So we believe that what we can do is the individual makes their application, they tell us about the condition or the disability that they are experiencing, the impact that has on them. The form that is being significantly redesigned in order to shorten it, to make it clear the purpose of the questions that we are asking in that form. And then we look for where the evidence can be found that supports what the individual is saying or not. And if that evidence can be brought forward, it will be the agency's responsibility to secure any evidence that the individual has not supplied but that we need. Where that evidence is then supplied and there is no contradiction or area of doubt, then we believe that we can make a decision at that point on not only on entitlement but also on level. Assessments, therefore, become necessary, one-to-one health assessments become necessary, either where the individual does not want to give their permission to us to access the data about them from elsewhere, or where there is a contradiction in what we're looking at. And so my belief is that that will significantly reduce the number of assessments, a belief supported by our expert group, and they are currently charged with the task of working out for me exactly what should be the evidence at that first point of decision. Okay. Where are the obstacles in data access between one part of the public sector and another, particularly around around health records. I don't want access to everything in the health record. There are bits I need. It's not always the GP. It may be the practice nurse, it may be the occupational therapist, it may be the physio that has the information about impact. So they're working that through for us so that we can then have the right data protocols in place. But all of that allows us as a government to not only meet our commitment that the private sector will not deliver those one-to-one health assessments in Scotland, but to also look at how we might create a pool of individuals who will deliver that, who are otherwise employed in the public sector, but will allow us to draw down from that pool the right clinical or professional expertise for the condition that is being assessed, which I hope will help us overcome some of the concerns around, for example, mental health, neurological conditions, fluctuating conditions and so on.
Do you, and so much of what you describe hits on some of the weaknesses that we've spotted as we've looked at PIP ourselves, particularly around gathering the right data early on. Do you have a sense yet, and you're absolutely right that there are data transfer issues and there's a whole host of reasons that make that tricky. Do you have a sense yet for how that data will be provided. Will it be online? Will it be data flow? Will it be scanned documents and sent? That's one of the most unwieldy parts of the system, I think. Do you have a sense of how that might actually physically operate yet?
Not completely, or not finally, I think is probably fair. I think initially it will be a mix because it has to in part reflect the state of the records held, the nature of the data and how it is held in those other public sectors. And we know that in the health service, the data is currently held in slightly different formats across the country in GP practices, for example, although our health service is moving to a single approach. So in the interim, there may be a mix of how the data is transferred. And of course, we have to reach agreement. I'm very mindful, not only from the individual's point of view, about the importance of security around data transfer and actually only seeking the data we actually need as opposed to data that we don't need, but also from the other end of those who might be providing that data for us about some of the restrictions that are placed on them in terms of, for example, for GPs, the insurance requirements that they have and so on. So what we have done is what I think is sensible in all my working life so far. It takes me to feel very strongly this is sensible, and that is that if you've got a problem you want to fix, then you get the right people in the room to fix it, and those are the people who know those systems. So the small group that is looking at that is chaired by Alan McDivitt from the BMA's GP group and Tessa Burke, who is the chief exec of one of our major disability organisations. But they will bring in other expertise around integrated health and social care records and so on, to work through those problems for us with our own digital and service design specialists.
Okay, two last parts very quickly, if I may. Once, and that is such a tricky area, once that's all done, you've got the data, you've got this new shiny form, assessments will or won't happen depending on... how do you see the separation then between this new public body and the decision maker around award? Because at the moment it's very separate. It's Atos or Capita, whoever it might be, doing an assessment. They have nothing to do with the decision making on the award at the end of it. That's a totally separate function. How do you envisage that part of the process working?
And that would be the same.
Right, so that wouldn't change.
That separation is really important. If we're going to ask health or social care professionals to undertake those assessments for us, and I do think in many instances social care is more likely to be the expertise that we need as opposed to health. If we're going to ask them to undertake those assessments for us, they have a particular relationship with the individual that they are assessing that should not be compromised by the perception or the reality that the person undertaking the assessment is going to make the decision. Okay. The decision has to sit in our social security agency so that it is responsible for its decisions, and as the Minister I am responsible for its decisions. And the direct accountability to me as a government minister, to our Scottish Parliament and of course to our citizens is really clear in that manner.
And when do you have a sense, the clock is ticking, as to when you might have this process all worked through, costed, because I can see some big new costs there associated with gathering all this data and intelligence about health records. When do you have a sense when the process might be to share with us ready and the costings associated with it?
Well, we are working towards that deadline you mentioned. I think I might query the notion that this will bring additional costs, because of course one of the costs that we're going to save is not contracting with the private sector and all their overheads and their buildings
when I say cost, I don't necessarily mean more just the costings. The
costings will be different, but this will all be delivered through the public sector in its wider sense. Now, we've begun what is called the first phase, the discovery phase, in terms of disability, the whole disability assistance, all the benefits within that, working with our digital and service delivery teams and our policy teams, our experience panels, and that expert group is already underway. in tackling the specific areas that you and I have just discussed. So that work has begun, and we're working towards that end date of delivery, where we take full competence, executive competence and responsibility towards that end date that you've described.
Right. In terms of financial costings, I would just say there's quite a detailed financial memorandum that accompanies the Scottish Government's bill on social security, so you can access that online from the Scottish Parliament's website, and that will give you the costs of the system that we're establishing.
It's a really important experiment for us, so thank you. Jeane, thank you for coming. Dawn and Stephen,
Thank you.
We hope to report soon.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.